Welcome back to another tutorial. In this one we're going to be continuing with our channels application, which is all about creating a chat app with Django Channels. In the last one we were able to get this to work, and we got something that looks like this, where we got this little text input, we send a message, and then you can see that this is what's sent to the group, and everyone who's on this port can actually see all the messages coming through here. Now this is great to get started with, but we want to obviously improve this, make it look better, make it work better. So it would be good for you to actually sit down, write a list of things that you think should actually be improved about this, because that's how we ultimately decide what we need to do to make this better. And one of the things that really stands out is the fact that if I reload, you can see that the message is gone. Now, unless that's what you're actually aiming to achieve, then that's great, but most chat applications store all their messages in some kind of database, so we're going to need to look at doing that, and that's probably the focus point of this video. The second thing is just making this look better, because it's always nicer to work with something that actually looks nicer, and we'll add a few little functionality improvements so that it actually looks like we're chatting to different users in the same way that it would kind of look like if you're on WhatsApp or Telegram or something like that. So before we get started, what you want to do is just go to our GitHub repository. Here you can just navigate to our just chat repository here, and you can either clone or download this repository to get started. Once you've got that, we can dive right in. So once you've downloaded the repository, then what you can do to re-navigate back to the same code that I'm starting with in this video, then you can just go to the commits of the repository, and whichever one you want to go back to, at this point it's the readme, so you just click on that commit and you'll see the commit hash here. So you just copy that commit hash, and then in your terminal you can just say, if you've actually cloned the repository that is, then git reset -- hard, and then the commit hash like that. If you do that, then that will take you back to the code that I'm starting with right now. Right off the bat, what I'm going to do is remove the async and make it just to the WebSocket consumer that we're going to work with. The reason for this you'll see later. It's just so that we can avoid complications, but eventually we'll look to bring this back. So that means that we can remove the async and we remove the await call, but we also need to import then our async to sync command. So we say from asgi ref.sync import async to sync, and then we use this command instead of the await call. So we just come and add this in there, and we're going to do this for the rest of these methods here as well. Cool, so that's all of those taken care of now. And I'm just going to remove these comments as well so that we just clean it up a little bit. Right, so now let's actually run the server and make sure that we have this working. So we'll just test this out. Let's send a message, click send, and there it is. Cool. So we've got our consumer working, and we want to now store those messages. We want to store them somewhere, and kind of with the intention that we would preload them. So if you think about WhatsApp or any kind of messaging service, when you open up the app, all the messages will preload, because those are the messages that you've sent already. And so that means that they were saved somewhere. So the easiest way to do this is just to create a model in our chat app, and then when the message is received, then we would create a message model or instance of the model, save it to the database, and then every time the chat was opened or you were connecting to it, then it would reload all those messages that you've sent. So that's the basic logic behind it. And so before we can actually implement this here in the consumer, we need to get started with our model. So inside the chat models.py, we're going to create our message model. So let's get started with a class of message inheriting from models.model, and it's a very simple model. If we think about the message, it's going to need an author, and it's going to need some kind of actual message content, so what the text of the message was, and then a timestamp, which is just helpful if we want to filter the data as well. And that's really all the fields that we need. So if we want to have an author, then we're going to make that a foreign key with the default user model. So that means that we need to import from django.contrib.auth import get user model. You can also do this with the settings default user model as well. And we'll just say user equals get user model. And this author is going to be a foreign key on the user. I'll specify the related name as author messages. And we'll say on delete equals models.cascade, which means if the user is deleted, then all of the messages associated with that user will be deleted as well. Then we have the content, which we can just make a text field, nothing fancy. And then we have the timestamp, which is a date time field. And I'm going to set auto now add as true, meaning that when the message is created, the timestamp will be added at that exact moment. We don't have to actually pass it in. And we can just save that. And I'll just say define string self, and we'll say return. We'll just say self.author.username. Something to also think about is, let's say that we had thousands of messages. Well, we wouldn't be loading all those messages at once. That really never happens. Even in blog posts, you see that the articles are paginated in some way, or you only get a certain number of articles for every request that you make. So we would most likely only want a certain number of messages to preload. So you could just say that that's 20 or 30 messages that preload. So we'll just add a method here and say define last 30 messages, which takes in self, and then we'll just say return message.objects, and we'll say .order by, and this is to get it in the reverse order, so the most recent timestamp first, and we just say .all, and we'll only say the last 30. Cool. So only the last 30 messages will load. This is actually quite a lot. You could probably make this 10. So let's actually do that. So last 10 messages. And it's more of a convenient thing. So we'll see how this plays out. But that really is it. That's the model that we're going to be working with. So we can go and migrate this. So let's say manage.py, make migrations, and then we'll say migrate. Great, we can run the server again now. And we can actually go ahead and close that off. And we can bring it here into our consumer. So from .models import message. And now we need to think about how are we going to actually handle this? Where in the consumer would we actually create the message? Well, not on the connect, because all that's doing is actually adding the user to the group. Then definitely not on the disconnect, potentially on the receive. So when the receive is called, then here we're actually getting our message data that's coming from the text JSON. So that could be somewhere. And then the chat message is actually the send command. So it would most logically be here in the receive method. Instead of directly putting it in there, what I'm going to do is show you some convenience methods that we can add to add a lot more functionality to the consumer. And you'll see what I mean once we're actually implementing this. So right here at the top, we're going to add two methods. And these methods are going to perform a certain command that we provide to the consumer. So the logic here is that when you send a message to the consumer that's received in the WebSocket, you've got this type, you've got a message here, but there's also going to be a command. And the command that you send will dictate what actually needs to happen. So that could be, for example, load all messages or preload messages, let's say. That would be the first command. And what that command will do is it will get the last 30 or last 10 messages, and it will send it into the chat and preload your chat for you. Then another command would be the actual send message, and that would send the particular message that you've just typed out. So two different commands that do two different things, and we're just going to handle it like that. And that way, all you can do is just add another command if you wanted to do something else, and then handle what must actually happen here on the consumer when that command is called. So the first one is going to be the fetch messages. And this is going to take in self and data, and then we're going to do some stuff in there. Then the second one is going to be the new message. So kind of what I just said. So self and data as well. Put it in parse there. And we'll enter what actually takes place here in a second. And so next, we're just going to add our commands here. So this is going to be, the first one will be fetch messages, which corresponds to, well, fetch messages. And then the next one will be new message. And this will be new message. The way that we can handle this is, let's grab our commands there, and we're going to come into the receive method here, and we're going to change this up a little bit. First, I'm going to rename this to be data and that like that. So it's just a bit shorter. And actually everything from here we can just enter, and we'll create a new method which will be called send chat message, which takes in self and a message. And then we'll just take that there. So we're basically calling the group send method right here, and we don't need to actually get the message. We'll pass it in directly in there. And so here in the receive method, we're grabbing the data from this JSON.loads, which is fine. But now what we want to do is determine what was the command that was sent. So to actually get the command, we would just say data of command like that. So grabbing the command from the dictionary, and then that would give us some kind of message, which would either be fetch messages or new message. And so what we want to do is, depending on the message that was sent, call the respective function for that message. So all we need to do for that is just say self.commands and grab the key of this command inside the commands dictionary here. So if the message was fetch messages, it's going to be this key in commands, and it will call the fetch messages function. Then all you need to do at the end here is just pass in the method arguments, so self and data, just like that. And that's the receive method. And actually, to kind of test this out, what we'll do is just add some print statements here. So let's say print fetch, and then we'll just add this here and say print new message. Now we've got the server running. And what I need to do is go into the templates into index.html, or rather room.html, and we need to go to the actual send method here, which is this chat socket.send, and then we stringify the message there. Now what I'm going to do is add another entry in the dictionary, and this is going to be the command, and we'll specify fetch messages. Now let's just actually close this, and we'll come in here. Let's refresh this and we'll inspect. Cool. So if I send test and click send, obviously nothing's coming through here because we're not handling it. And there you see fetch. And that was, let's go back in the consumer, coming from the fetch messages, because that was the command that was called and received in the receive method. If I come back and let's actually get the right. So new message, if we go back into room.html, change the command to new message, come back here, refresh this, send another one, send, come back, we see new message. So this command is quite handy because then you can then just handle the command inside here through this very nifty one-liner command to call a corresponding function inside the dictionary. So that's quite nice. But now we actually want to handle what those commands do. What do these functions actually do? So to fetch the messages, that means we need to grab all those messages we just talked about, and we just added that convenience method on the model. So we've just imported it there, and we want to get the messages that we need to preload. So we'll just say messages equals to message dot last 10 messages, like that. So this is going to get the last 10 created messages, and then we want to pass that back into the WebSocket. So we want to send those messages out. So we'll just create a content dictionary, and this is going to have messages. And here, what I want to do is I want to take the messages and kind of serialize it, so create it into a JSON object. To actually handle that, I'm going to create a convenience method as well. So for the time being, let's just say self.messages to JSON, like that, and then pass in messages. Then this messages to JSON, we can come below the define new message, and we'll say define messages to JSON, which takes in self and takes in messages as what's being inputted in here. And the whole point of this method is to create the JSON version of those messages. Now remember, we're actually getting 10 messages here, we're not getting one. So we'd actually have to loop through all the messages coming in here and serialize each message by itself. So to do that, what we can do is create this result, which is just an empty list, and then for each message in those messages, then we will handle what actually happens to those messages. So we'll say result.append by self. And now I'm going to actually add the convenience method to handle specifically serializing that message itself. So we'll say message to JSON, so singular message, and pass in the actual message itself. And then at the end of all of that, then we just say return result. So what you'll have at the end of this is a list of JSON objects, basically. And now we just need to add the method message to JSON. So we say define message to JSON, takes in self and an instance of a message. Remember that these are also objects from the database. So you can actually access the fields of that message object or message model, which are these fields here. So that's the actual message that's being passed in here. And what we want to do is return an object for each message that's being passed in, kind of like serializing. So we say return an object, and it's going to have an author, right? Because our model has an author. And so we just have to access that from the message. So we just say message.author.username. Then we have the content, which is the content on the model. So we say message.content. And then we have the timestamp. So we say timestamp, again, would be the message.timestamp, but we're just going to create that as a string because it would be a date object. And so that entire object, this JSON object, is what would be returned for every single time in the list of messages that were actually grabbed here in this last 10 messages. So what will happen here is once we've created the content, remember messages is now a list of messages. What we want to do is send that list out. So we're going to say self.send chat message, and that's going to contain the content. So this send chat message we handled down here when we broke it away from the receive. It takes in a message, which in this case is the content, and it sends that message via the chat message method on the consumer, which is this chat message. It takes in an event, grabs the message, and then creates a JSON dump of the message. Now, the trick here is that you don't need to do this again. You don't need to actually pass in the object. So all we need to do is just pass in message like that. And in fact, we can actually change this a little bit. So we'll get rid of the async to sync and just call self.send there, and actually create another method here and say define send message, which takes in self and the message we want to send, and then just say self.send, and exactly the same as that, like this. Then we can use the send message over here. So passing in the content and then straight away just sending it. Whereas the chat message here is actually grabbing the message from the event and then sending it. And we're going to use this chat message method here inside our new message method here. So let's actually handle this part now. And this is where we want to bring in our message model that will be created. So to create the actual model, we're going to need two things. We need the author and we need the content. The author, I believe the best way to go about getting would actually just be by having a from property inside our message data. So we would say author equals to data from, and this from, the value of it would be the username of the user that's logged in. And so that way you could actually filter the users, and you can just import the user model. So let's say from Django contrib.auth import get user model, and grab our user model again here. So we'll say user equals get user. Then here we can just filter them and say objects.filter where the username equals to the author, and then grab the first one in there. And you could also use like the get object or for method as well. That's perfect as well. But the whole point is just pass in the username and filter the user objects by that username, so that now we have the first parameter or the first field of the message model. And now we can just go and say message equals to message and say objects dot create, and we'll pass in the author as the author user, and the content would be the data message. So let's just bring this down like this. So basically just creating the message object, storing it in this message variable, and now we can pass that into the content in the same way as what we're doing here. And this time you can pass in a command, and the command would be a new message, and then say the message would be self.message to JSON. Remember, it's the singular version because this is one message. So we're basically grabbing all the data off that one message and pass that message in there. And then we'll say return send, and this should be self.send chat message of the content. And so that actually handles our new message method, and that is the end of the methods on our consumer. It is a lot to take in, but hopefully the process made sense. And if you have other ways that you think are more convenient than this, then go ahead and implement it like that. But this is just one way that we can handle multiple commands or multiple functions that we want to handle. And so now we can actually get started with jumping back into our room.html to start styling this up, making it look a little bit better. But before we actually do that, right now we're using this new websocket command, and that's just one thing that I think we can also change to become a reconnecting websocket. And so to use this reconnecting WebSocket, you can go to this GitHub repository, which is this URL here. So Joe Walnes /reconnecting WebSocket. And so basically it's just a little library for using this reconnecting WebSocket, so that instead of saying new WebSocket like that, you can just say new reconnecting WebSocket. And that'll just handle the reconnecting for you, which I think is a little bit convenient. So all you want to do is just come here and download this, and you can see this reconnecting WebSocket.js file. You can copy this file and bring it into your project right here. So you can just go ahead and create a static folder. So just say static and bring the file in right there. You don't need the minified one, but I don't think it'll be a problem if you grab that. Anyways, just grab that, bring this in here, and then we'll continue from there. Right, so here it is. Here's the file. I'm not going to go through it, but that's what it is. So what we basically want to do now is just add a script to include that. So we just say script, and then we set the source to static, and we're going to need to add a couple things to make that work. But so one, we need to say load static and spell that correctly. And the path here is just going to be this actual reconnecting websocket.js, so just like that. And that means that in our settings we're going to add this to the bottom here. So this will be our static files directories, which will just be a list of os.path.join the base directory with static. And that means that here we can create a reconnecting WebSocket because we're grabbing this JS file there. So let's actually see if this works. And we don't get any errors, so that seems pretty good. Now that we've handled this, what I think would be good to do now is to start styling this. So the best advice I can give on styling anything is to know your limits. If you know that you can't actually style something, you're not a front-end developer, don't bother trying to style it, because it just ends up being a lot more frustrating and a lot of time wasted for you if you really haven't learned this stuff from scratch. I'm talking about CSS, SAS, and all that stuff. I don't know it, so I can't teach it to you, but what I do know how to do is Google for stuff. So what you can do is search for chat templates, and you'll come across some websites that give you free chat HTML snippets or chat templates, and all you need to do is find one that you like. So I found one that I like, which is this boot snip. So if you click on this, then here you get a whole bunch of different chat examples, and you can look through them and find whichever one you like. Now, I particularly like this one here. I don't see, it just says chat. So if I click on that, we'll see the URL now. So this is bootsnip/snippets EX capital R5V. So this is what it looks like. And to actually just copy the code, just click on HTML. And this is the HTML. So you can just highlight all of that, copy it, come in here, create a new file, and we'll actually add one there. So chat.html, paste everything there. And now you have a chat app that was nice and styled. And now all you need to do is just configure it. So because this is not part of the scope of the video, I'm not going to make you watch how to filter through this. What you can do is just go to the repository and find the HTML file once it's done. And that's also going to be the style.css and the main.js file. But I'll quickly walk through how we can actually just improve this for us. So one, you want to remove all the links that are not necessary. So if we just get all the scripts in a line here, then you can see here are a bunch of scripts, and then you get a whole bunch of scripts there. So we'll cut those out and we'll come and paste them in there. So these are useful. This is Bootstrap and jQuery. We need that. But then there's also some here. So Google Fonts, we need that. This CodePen, we don't need that. The mask, I'm not 100% sure if we need that either. It's an SVG, we'll just keep it. And then you get an ICO as well. Again, you decide really what you need. Then there's a meta tag, and then there's all these assets as well. Most of them I don't think we actually need. What we do need though are the JavaScript scripts, again Bootstrap and jQuery, and then the style sheet. So what you do is we just have to get the style here, so just like that, and we can actually bring that down and delete that comment. So there's the style. You cut this out and you create another file, and you just make sure that that is in the static directory, so like right there, and we'll create style.css, paste it there, get rid of the top, and like that, and there's your style. So that's done. And then the JavaScript, we do the same. So we come all the way down to the bottom, and you can see you've got a script here. So if we go to the top of the script, there it is here. So this script, then you would come into static as well, and you would create main.js, paste this in there, and like that. And then lastly, then what we want to do here is we want to actually filter down the HTML because there's way too much, and obviously there was just so much being repeated here, because you can see there's tons of contacts and tons of messages, but you just kind of want to get an example of one CSS style of each. So like one example of a sent message, one of a replied message. So you just come here to the contacts and see how many contacts there are. And so now you can see there's all these contacts. So again, I'm going to remove pretty much all of them except for the front two, these two there, just so you have them as examples. And then the same thing for, if we come back down here, then you have these list elements that are either sent or replies. So we keep that and get rid of just enough so that we have these two. And so now the HTML is a lot thinner and there's not that much we have to really worry about. Once you've gotten to this point, then you'll see that when you run the actual server, you'll see that this is very zoomed out, like crazy zoomed out, and it doesn't look good. So again, I'm going to save you the time of having to watch me how to style this, and you can find the edited version of the JavaScript file and the CSS file in the repository under the static folder here. So main.js will be edited. Everything from this function new message, we cut that out because we don't need that. And a lot of the style.css we change as well so that it looks a little bit better. So what I'm going to do now is go and grab those files, put them in here, and then we can continue from that. Okay, so here's the finished version of the HTML file. I've got static loaded at the top, all the links and scripts that I thought were necessary. Here's the link to the style.css as well. We need that. And then you've got the div ID of frame. Everything was the same there. And we've got our 2 examples there. And all the HTML that you saw before. Then you've got the script to main.js and the script to the reconnecting websocket.js file as well. And so all I'm going to do now is actually remove this room.html and rename our chat.html to be room.html. So this is the new room that we're using. And where you want to pay attention to is the JavaScript here at the end. Now, specifically, this script is left inside room.html so that these variables here can actually be used in the Django template to get those context variables that are passed into the view. Now, this username isn't going to be showing yet, so what we need to do is handle the view to pass in this username into the context. So let's go into views.py. And so here we're going to add another entry into the dictionary that's being passed in, and this is going to be username. Now, because this is a request, right, this page is actually being rendered, this page. That means that the request actually has a user, so we can do the same thing of how we mark safe this JSON dump of the room name. Just copy and paste that there and pass in request.user.username. And the only thing that we need to take care of now is what happens if there's an anonymous user. Well, the easiest fix to that is just to add the login required decorator to make sure that you have to be logged in to actually chat. And to actually use the login decorator, we need to import that from contrib.auth.decorators. So import login required. And now we are good to go with view, so we can get rid of that. And now you can understand how we're getting the username into the script. We're using the new Reconnecting WebSocket, which is coming from the Reconnecting WebSocket JS file there. And then we've got the chat.onMessage function, which was altered quite a little bit. So we were originally getting the data, we were getting the message from the data. Now if you want to get the author, you just have to get the author from the message. Because remember, inside our consumer, we were creating this object here. So the author is one of the keys in the message dictionary, which is being passed in there. And then this part here is just creating HTML that needs to be displayed. So we use document.createElement. First we create a list item, then an image and a paragraph which go inside the list item. And the reason for that is this is a list item there. So we're basically recreating a message that's being sent. And then we append it into the div or into the unordered list that has an ID of chat log. So that's what's happening here. We say the image source is equal to just an example image source, which is one of those there. We can change that obviously. Then the text content is equal to the content that came from the message itself. And here is the critical point of deciding where the message is displayed, meaning is it a sent message or is it a reply? And the key to doing this is just to compare the author to the username. So if the username, which remember is this up here, that's your username. That's what your logged in user's username is. So if the message you just received has an author that's the same as your username, that means that you sent it. So that means that the message should have a class name of sent. Otherwise, it means the author is not you. And that means you just received a message. So the class name should be replies. And again, the author is coming from the message because it's a JSON object. And so lastly, once you've got the actual list tag, you can then append the image inside it, append the p tag inside it, and then find the chat log and append the list item inside there. So basically creating the new message. And that's actually what was being done inside main.js, but we needed to comment that out so that we could actually get the value of the form. So that was that. The onClose stayed the same, the query selector stayed the same, and all that's changed here in the chat socket was what we actually send into the socket. So again, we're listening for the click, we get the value from the input, and that is the message. So we say the command is a new message. The actual message being sent is the message from the input, and then we pass in from being the username. And that's important because here in the consumer, if we come up to this new message, we have the author as the value of this data from. So every time you send a message with the from, it's going to get that and then create the actual message in the backend and then actually call the new message here. So with all of that done, we can check if the server is running, and it is. So we're just going to run the server again. And if we come inside here and refresh this, it's asking us to log in. Now I don't have any users, so what I'm going to do is create 2 super users, because I'm not going to implement authentication. You can look at one of our other videos of how to add in Django All-Auth, for example. So I'm just going to add those super users now. Cool, so those users are now created. So I'm going to come back in here and go to the admin. And while we're at that, we can actually come into the admin here and register our model. So from models, import message, and then admin.site.register the message, just like that. Cool. Let me come in here, and I'm going to log in to the admin user on this instance, and then create a incognito window, and I'm going to log in at the same place, and this will be the other super user. Cool. So let's go to /chat, and let's say we want to enter test, and there we go. So that's what it looks like so far. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. So we'll go to chat and enter test, and there's this over here. Cool. So if we enter a message here, and what we can actually do is, just to make sure that we know who we are, we can come into the room.html and let's search for, okay, so this one here, we can then just replace this with username. So if we come back in here, now you've got admin, and we can fix the serialization, but I'm not too worried about that. So that's admin there. Refresh this, Matt. So you can see 2 different users, same chat. Yes, we've left those messages in, but that's just for reference. So let's say I add a message here. Let's say hi, and you get hi. And what's interesting is that the message shows on the side that you actually belong to. So meaning this is my user, so admin sent the message, and it's on the left hand side. Then here I received it, so it was on the right hand side, and that's actually really, really cool. And so we can actually test this on this side as well. Let's say we send that, and you see that this shows on the left hand side as well, and you see it on the right hand side here. Now obviously the display pictures aren't working, but I mean, that really isn't the worst thing in the world to worry about. At least for the time being, this is starting to take form into something that looks really good and actually looks like a chat app. But again, if we refresh this, then you can see the messages aren't displaying. And so that's what we want to take care of now. So just for the purpose of keeping this tutorial relatively short, to actually load the messages, to preload them, what we need to do is specify the onOpen method on the chat socket. What this does is listen for when the connection is actually made, and once it actually is made, then you can do something. So what I've done is I've added a fetch messages command here that will function, and if we take a look at it, all it's doing is it's sending a message to the chat socket with the command of fetch messages. So when it does that in our consumer, then we handle the fetch messages and pass in a command of messages as well, so that it can be sent back and we can handle it there. And so once you've actually done that, once you've sent the fetch messages, then you need to handle what's going to happen when all those messages come through. So just to clean up the code, we've changed the onMessage method as well. We're still grabbing the data, passing it with JSON, but now what we're doing is we're checking for the command. So if the command was messages, which is the command being sent here in the fetch messages, then what's going to happen is it's going to loop through all the messages and create the message that needs to be displayed. Now the create message function is everything that you saw earlier, which was basically creating the list item and appending it to the list of chat objects. So it's all of that just put in its own function and then called for every message received in our fetch command. Otherwise, if the command was not the fetch command, it was the new message, so meaning I just typed a new message and clicked send, then we just pass that data into the create message to create that new message. So just a little bit of reworking here so that we avoid duplicating ourselves. And so once you've added that in, then everything actually pretty much works. The only thing is that on the model, you just have to remove the self from our last 10 messages here. It used to be self, but now if you get rid of that, then it will not give you any problems. So let's take a look. And so if we just refresh this, then here's what it looks like. You can obviously, these are the first two over there, so we can actually remove those, and we'll just comment them out right here. So if we refresh this now you can see that the messages are being loaded into the chat. So those are all the messages that I've sent. If I send another one, let's say testing again, I click send and we see that one there. And if I come in here and we scroll down, then you can see testing again at the bottom. I'll obviously have to fix the styling, but you get the point. If I send another one, let's say a whatever, then if we scroll down, then there it is. And if we come in here, then we see them there. Cool. So ultimately that is working. It's handling the actual loading of the messages, and it's handling when you create a message, and it's storing the messages. So now if we refresh the page, it's still going to have all those messages, and that's kind of the point. One thing we can see here though is that it is in reverse order, so we might want to actually reverse them again. So there's always going to be things that we can touch up, but for the purpose of this video, I think we've covered enough. We've actually done quite a lot, and it's looking like a real chat application now. But again, we need to ask what can we actually improve in the next one. And again, so the first one we just saw now was the reverse ordering of the messages, so we can look at that. We can fix this JSON serializing of the username. Obviously something's not right there. And then just a couple things in terms of functionality and maybe things that would be pretty cool is, what if this URL was actually the base URL of the whole application, and these chat contacts here on the side were the links to the different channels. So if you clicked on one of these, it would re-navigate you to that chat and hence reload the messages for that specific chat. I think that would be a pretty cool implementation, and something that's representative of what a real chat app is like WhatsApp or Telegram. So start thinking about how we can do that, and potentially how we're going to get this into React. I think it'll actually be a little bit easier when we get it into React, so we can look at handling all of those things in the next one. Otherwise, if you enjoyed this video, leave a comment down below. Let us know what you thought, if there's anything else you think that we should be adding and we're leaving out. And otherwise, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.